The next day, I went early to the Kremlin. Scarcely had I reached the palace, when Napoleon came out of it to leave Moscow forever. He perceived me. "I hope that you will not follow me on horseback. You are not in a fit state to do it. You can get into one of my carriages." I thanked him, and replied that I thought I should be in a condition to accompany him. We quitted this capital, and we took the road of Kaluga. When we were about 3 leagues distant, the Emperor stopped to wait for news from Mortier, who had orders to destroy the Kremlin on leaving the place. He was walking in a field with Monsieur Daru. This gentleman left him, and I was called. "Well, Rapp, we are going to retreat to the frontiers of Poland by the road of Kaluga. I shall take up good winter quarters. I hope that Alexander will make peace. You have waited a long time, sire. The inhabitants foretell that it will be a severe winter." Po, with your inhabitants. It is the 19th of October today. You see how fine it is. Do you not recognize my star? Besides, I could not leave without sending on all the sick and wounded. I was not to give them up to the rage of the Russians. I believe, sire, that you would have done better to have left them at Moscow. The Russians would not have hurt them, whilst they are exposed for want of aid to die on the road. Napoleon was not of that opinion, but all that he said to me in the way of encouragement did not deceive even himself. His countenance bore the marks of uneasiness. At last, an officer dispatched from the Marshal arrived. It was my aide-de-camp Turkheim, who informed us that Moscow was tranquil, that some polks of Cossacks had appeared in the environs, but they took care not to approach the Kremlin or any of the quarters still occupied by the French troops. We proceeded on our march. In the evening we arrived at Krasnoi. The look of the country was not encouraging to Napoleon. The hideous aspect, the wild air of the slaves, was revolting to eyes accustomed to other climates. I would not leave a man there. I would give all the treasures of Russia, not to leave a single wounded man behind. We must take horses, wagons, carriages, everything to carry them on. Send me a secretary. The secretary came. It was to write to Mortier what he had just been telling me. It is of use to copy the dispatch. These instructions are not unworthy to be known. Those who have so often declaimed against his indifference should study them. To the Major General. Acquaint the Duke de Treviso that as soon as his business in Moscow is finished, that is, on the 23rd at 3 o'clock in the morning, he is to begin to march, and that he must come on the 24th to Kubinsko. And from that place, instead of going to Mojaisk, he is to proceed to Vereya, where he will arrive on the 25th. He will serve as an intermediate force between Mojaisk, where the Duke d'Abrantes is, and Borovsk, where the army will be. It will be right for him to send officers to Fominsko to inform us of his march. He will take with him the adjutant Commandant Bourmont, the Bavarians, and the Spaniards who are at the palace of Galitzin, all the Westphalians of the first and second posts, and all the Westphalians that he can find, he must assemble and direct towards Mojaisk. If they are not in sufficient number, he will protect their passage with the cavalry. The Duke de Treviso will inform the Duke d'Abrantes of everything relative to the surrender of Moscow. It is necessary that he write to us tomorrow, the 22nd, not by the road of Desma, but by that of Karapovo and Fominskoy. On the 23rd, he will send us a letter by the road of Mojaisk. His officer will leave the road at Kubinsko to come to Fominsko, as the headquarters on the 23rd are likely to be at Borovsk or at Fominskos. Whether the Duke de Treviso perform his operation at 3 o'clock in the morning of tomorrow the 22nd, or on the 23rd at the same hour, as I have since ordered him, he is in either case to follow these same directions. By these means, the Duke de Treviso may be considered as the rearguard of the army. I cannot too strongly recommend to place on the wagons belonging to the Young Guard, or those belonging to the dismounted cavalry, in short, on all that can be found, the men who remain still in the hospitals. The Romans gave civic crowns to those who saved citizens. The Duke will deserve as many as he may save soldiers. He must mount them on his horses, and on those of all his people. This is what the Emperor did at the siege of Saint-Jean d'Acre. He ought the rather to take this step, because as soon as the convoy shall have joined the army, it will have wagons and horses, which the consumption of provisions will have rendered useless. The Emperor hopes that he shall have the pleasure of thanking the Duc de Treviso for having saved 500 men. He ought, as is but just, to begin with the officers, then the sub-officers, and to give the French the preference. He must assemble all the generals and officers under his command to make them sensible of the importance of this measure, and how much they will gain the Emperor's esteem by saving for him 500 men. We marched on towards Borusk, where we arrived on the 4th day. The town was completely abandoned. In the meantime, Kutuzov was peaceably engaged in issuing his proclamations. He was quite at ease in his camp at Tarentino. He kept up no watch, either on his front or wings. He had no idea at all of the movement we were making. He learned at last that we were marching towards Kaluga. He soon broke up his cantonments and appeared at Maloyaroslavets at the same time as our columns. The action began. We heard from Borusk a distant cannonade. I was suffering greatly from my wound, but I would not leave Napoleon. We mounted horse. We arrived towards evening in sight of the field of battle. They were still fighting, but the firing soon ceased. Prince Eugene had forced a position which must have been defended to extremity. Our troops had covered themselves with glory. It is a day that the army of Italy ought to inscribe in its calendar. Napoleon bivouacked at a league and a half from the scene. The next day we took horse at 7:30 in the morning to visit the ground on which the battle had been fought. The Emperor was placed between the Duc de Vicenza, Prince de Neuchâtel, and myself. We had scarcely quitted the huts where we had passed the night, when we perceived a cloud of Cossacks. They proceeded from a wood in advance on our right. They were drawn up in pretty regular files. We took them for French cavalry. The Duc de Vicenza was the first who recognized them. "Sire, these are Cossacks." "That is impossible," replied Napoleon. They rushed upon us, shouting with all their might. I seized the Emperor's horse by the bridle. I turned it round myself. "But these are our troops?" "They are the Cossacks. Make speed." "They are Cossacks, indeed," said Berthier. "Without doubt," added Mouton. Napoleon gave some orders and withdrew. I advanced at the head of the squadron on duty. We were overthrown. My horse received a wound 6 inches deep from a lance and fell, with me under him. We were trampled underfoot by these barbarians. Fortunately, they perceived at some distance a troop of artillery. They ran towards the spot. Marshal Bessières had time to come up with the horse grenadiers of the guard. He charged them and retook from them the covered wagons and the pieces of cannon which they were carrying away. I raised myself again on my legs. I was replaced in my saddle and proceeded as far as the bivouac. When Napoleon saw my horse covered with blood, he feared that I had again been wounded. He asked me whether I was. I replied that I had got off with a few contusions. He then began to laugh at our adventure, which, nevertheless, I did not find very amusing. I was well repaid by the account which he published of this affair. He loaded me with eulogiums. I never before experienced pleasure compared to that which I felt on reading the flattering things which he said of me. "General Rapp," says the bulletin, "had 1 horse killed under him in this charge. The intrepidity of which this general officer has given so many proofs is manifested on all occasions. I repeat with pride the praises of this great man. I shall never forget them." We returned to the field of battle. Napoleon wished to visit the place which had been the theatre of Prince Eugene's glory. He found that the position of the Russians had been excellent. He was astonished that they had allowed it to be forced. He perceived, from the appearance of the dead bodies, that the militia had been confounded with the troops of the line, and that if they had not fought with skill, they had gone to it at least with courage. The enemy's army retired some leagues on the road to Kaluga, and encamped. The retreat was intercepted. We threw ourselves to the right on Vereya. We arrived there early the next day and slept there. It was in that town that Napoleon learned that the Kremlin had been blown up. General Wintzingerode had not sufficiently restrained his impatience. He had ventured into this capital before our troops had evacuated it. They cut up his retreat. He tried to make them believe that he came to treat with them. He was born on the territory of the Confederation. He had no inclination to be made a prisoner. He was taken nevertheless, in spite of the white handkerchief that he was waving. Napoleon sent for him and fell into a violent passion, treated him with contempt, branded him with the name of traitor, and threatened to punish him. He even told me that a commission must be named to proceed with the trial of the gentleman immediately. He had him escorted by chosen gendarmes and ordered him to be confined au secret. Wintzingerode sought several times to exculpate himself, but Napoleon would not hear him. It has been pretended in the Russian army that this general spoke with courage and said very strong things to the emperor. It is not the fact. Anxiety was marked on his countenance. Everything expressed the disorder of mind into which the emperor's anger had thrown him. Each of us endeavored to appease the emperor. The King of Naples, the Duke de Vicenza particularly, suggested to him how much, in the present situation of things, any violence towards a man who hid his origin under the quality of a Russian general would be to be lamented. There was no council of war, and the affair rested there. As for us, Wintzingerode ought not to complain of our treatment. His situation inspired us all with interest. His aide-de-camp was treated with much kindness. Napoleon asked him his name. "Nareshkin," replied the young officer. "Nareshkin. One of that name is not made to be the aide-de-camp of a deserter." We were hurt at this want of consideration. We sought every means imaginable to make the general forget it. We set off the next day and reached the great road from Moscow by Mojaisk. The cold and privations were extreme. The hour of disasters had come upon us. We found our wounded lying dead on the road, and the Russians waiting for us at Vyazma. At the sight of these columns, the soldiers collected a remnant of energy, fell upon them, and defeated them. But we were harassed by troops animated by abundance and by hope of plunder. At every step, we were obliged to halt and fight. We slackened our march over a wasted country, which we should have gone over with the greatest rapidity. Cold, hunger, the Cossacks, every scourge was let loose upon us. The army was sinking under the weight of its misfortunes. The road was strewn with the dead. Our sufferings exceeded imagination. How many sick and wounded generals did I meet in this terrible retreat, whom I believed I would never again see? Of this number was General Friant, whose wounds were still open; General Durosnel, who travelled with a nervous fever, almost continually delirious; and the brave General Belliard, who was wounded by a gunshot in the Battle of the Moskowa. He had formerly penetrated nearly into Ethiopia. He had carried our colours farther than ever the Roman eagles had flown. He must have found a difference between the two climates. We marched for Smolensko. It was to have been the end of our miseries. We were to have found there food and clothing, wherewith to defend ourselves from the pests which were consuming us. We were not more than 18 leagues from it. Napoleon lodged in one of those little blockhouses that had been constructed to receive detachments from 50 to 60 men employed to protect the correspondence and communications. I was on duty. Some time had elapsed since any dispatches had arrived. At last one came. I delivered it to the emperor. He opened the parcel with haste. A monitor was uppermost. He ran it over. The first article which caught his eye was the enterprise of Mallet. He had not read the dispatches. He did not know what it was. What is this? What? Plots? Conspiracies? He opened his letters. They contained the detail of the attempt. He was thunderstruck. That police which knew everything, which guessed at everything, had suffered itself to be taken by surprise. Napoleon could not recover himself. Savary in la force? The minister of the police arrested, carried to a prison, and there shut up. I went to transmit some orders. The event had already transpired. Surprise and astonishment were depicted on every countenance, and some reflections were made, which till then had been withheld. The carelessness of the agents of the police was manifest. They are only alert because there is a general belief in their vigilance. Napoleon was not astonished that these wretches who frequent saloons and taverns, who obstruct everything, who insinuate themselves everywhere, should not have found out the plot. But he could not conceive the weakness of Rovigo. Why did he not rather let them kill him than be arrested? Doucet and Hollin showed much more courage. We proceeded on our journey. We crossed the Borysthenes. The emperor fixed his headquarters in a country house that had been laid waste, 12 leagues from Smolensko and 1.5 leagues behind the river. The banks, on the water side, are very steep in this part. They were covered with hoar frost. Napoleon was afraid that the artillery would not be able to get over them. He charged me to join Ney, who commanded the rearguard, to remain with him until everything was out of danger. I found the marshal engaged in giving chase to the Cossacks. I communicated to him the orders that I had to transmit to him, and we retired to a blockhouse which was to support the passage and where the headquarters were fixed. A part of the infantry crossed over. The remainder bivouacked in a little wood on the bank where we were. We were engaged all night in getting the cannon across. The last was on the ascent when the enemy appeared. They attacked immediately with considerable masses. We received their charges without being shaken, but our end was attained. We had no object in fighting. We retreated. We left behind a few hundreds of men, whom wounds and exhaustion had put out of a condition to follow. Poor creatures! They complained, they groaned, and called for death. It was a heart-rending sight. But what could we do? Everyone was bending under the burden of life, and supported it with difficulty. No one had sufficient strength to share it with others. The Russians pursued us. They wished to pass by main force. Ney received them with that vigor, that impetuosity, which he always displayed in his attacks. They were repulsed, and the bridge became a prey to the flames. The firing ceased. We withdrew during the night. I joined Napoleon at Smolensko the day after the next in the evening. He knew that a ball had grazed my head, and that another had killed my horse. He observed to me, "You may be at ease now. You will not be killed this campaign. I hope that your Majesty may not be deceived. But you often gave the same assurance to poor Lannes, who nevertheless was killed. No, no, you will not be killed. I believe it, but I may still be frozen to death." The Emperor bestowed eulogiums on Marshal Ney. What a man! What a soldier! What a vigorous fellow! He only talked thus by exclamations. He could not find words to express the admiration which this intrepid marshal inspired in him. The Prince de Neuchâtel entered. The conversation again turned on Mallet and Savary. Napoleon was merry at the expense of the Duke. His surprise, his arrest, were the subject of 1,000 pleasantries, of which the burden always was that he should rather have been killed than have allowed himself to be taken. The retreat had been disastrous. Every scourge that nature has in store we had experienced, but every day brought us nearer to Smolensko. We were to find in that town repose and abundance. We were marching, hope sustained us. She too was going to abandon us. Our misfortunes were to be as unheard of as our victories. The 4th Corps lost its cannon, Augereau's brigade was destroyed, and Vitebsk taken. We had no more ammunition or means of subsistence. We were in a frightful situation. It was necessary to be resigned. We put ourselves in motion. We arrived the following day at Krasnoi. Kutuzov, who was bearing on us with all his forces, had already an advanced guard there. It retired at the sight of our soldiers, and took post a league farther on, halting on the left on the borders of a forest which it covered with fires. Napoleon sent for me and said, "We have the Russian infantry quite close to us. It is the first time that they have shown so much boldness. I command you to charge them with the bayonet about midnight, surprise them, teach them not to be so desirous to approach so near to my headquarters. I place at your disposal all that remains of the young guard." I had made all the preparations. I was waiting near the fire of a Polish bivouac till the hour should arrive, when General Narbonne came and said, "Give up your troops to the Duc de Treviso. His Majesty does not wish you to be killed in this affair. He reserves for you another destiny." I received this counter-order with pleasure. I did not conceal it. I was weakened by fatigue, by sufferings, and cold. I was not inclined to march against the enemy. Moreover, his Cossacks had already given him the alarm. He was prepared. He received us as well as he could. He was nevertheless beaten and thrown back on his masses, which were in positions parallel to the road, and extended in some sort from Smolensko to Krasnoi. They attacked us in flank. They ought to have been able to defeat us. Fortunately, the illusion of our glory still continued. We were protected by the remembrance of our victories. Kutuzov saw from a distance our columns which were defiling on the road, but did not venture to attack them. He decided at last on running the risk, but a peasant informed him that Napoleon was at Krasnoi, that the guard occupied all the neighborhood. This news damped his courage. He revoked the orders that he had dispatched. We had long before taken the measure of his capacity. We always took it into our account. It was one of our resources. He might nevertheless change his mind, rush to arms, and destroy us. We all perceived it, but we had no news from Eugene. Davoust and Ney were in the rear. We could not leave them. The temperature, moreover, became every day more severe. The Russians also suffered. They had slumbered hitherto. They might slumber still. Napoleon resolved to take the chance of it. He waited. Everything turned out as he had foreseen. Maloyaroslavets wished to intercept the 4th Corps, but he could not reach it. 5,000 infantry, who had neither horses to clear away the assailants nor cannon to defend themselves with, constantly repulsed the multitudes of soldiers which were rushing on them, made head against all this advanced guard, and escaped. Davoust followed. The enemy flattered themselves that they could take their revenge on the Marshal, but the Emperor prevented it. He extended his line on the left of Krasnoi, brought some troops into action, and opened a pretty well-sustained fire of artillery. Kutuzov, alarmed at the sight of the 14,000 or 15,000 men who had been drawn together, recalled his detached corps. The Marshal passed over and came to take part in the action. The end was attained, the firing ceased, and the retreat commenced. The enemy tried to prevent it, but the 1st Regiment of the Voltigeurs of the Guard repulsed all their attacks. Neither the cavalry, the infantry, nor grape shot could move it. It perished on the spot. This heroic resistance struck the Russians. They discontinued the pursuit. As soon as we were out of one embarrassment, we fell into another. We, in number from 14,000 to 15,000 men, had ventured to place ourselves in line against Kutuzov's 20,000. We had extricated ourselves, without a reverse, from a situation where we ought to have been all taken, but our provisions, our rear was lost. Minsk had been surprised. The army of Moldavia covered the Beresina. Ney was still behind. Never had our situation been so terrible. Napoleon, who was astonished at this disastrous complication of affairs, dispatched orders to resume the offensive and to take Polotsk. Success appeared to him easy. If the Duke de Belluno show energy, the enterprise cannot fail. The character of the troops that he commands ensures it. It is Ney that I am uneasy about. What is to become of him? This marshal was in an unparalleled situation. All the valor, the calmness, and perseverance of that intrepid warrior were necessary to extricate him. He had received on the night of the 16th or 17th news of Eugene's battle and Davoust's departure. These two events could not move him. "All the Cossacks of Russia," said he on learning it, "should not hinder me from executing my instructions. I will not depart from them a tittle." He concluded his arrangements and proceeded to march. 6,000 infantry, 300 horses, and 12 pieces of cannon composed all his force. He was annoyed by the light troops of the enemy which hovered around his flanks. He was marching in close order, ready to receive any attack. At 3 o'clock, his vanguard reached Katowa and halted in sight of the corps of Maloyaroslavets. The weather was foggy. Neither party could see what troops were before them. Ney crosses a ravine which separated him from the enemy's troops, breaks through the first line, routs the second, and would have defeated the whole army if the ravages of the artillery had not prevented him. He was obliged to sound a retreat, but his attack had been so impetuous that they dared not pursue him. He lighted night fires, as if he intended to stop all night. The Russians imitated him. As soon as he had taken some rest, he removed his quarters, and resolved to interpose the Borysthenes as a line of separation between him and the enemy's troops, which were too numerous for him to be able to force. He rushed into the stream, on the ice, and reached the opposite bank, but new dangers were awaiting him there. The Cossacks covered the plain. They charged us and kept up a furious fire of grape-shot. Ney, who could not make any return to this destructive cannonade, hastened his march, dispersing, overthrowing everything that dared oppose him. He marched for a wood which was not far distant. He was on the point of reaching it, when a battery was unmasked on him and disorganized his column. The soldiers wavered and threw down their arms, but the marshal soon restored them to their courage. His words, his voice, his example encouraged the most timid. They rushed on, the enemy's artillery fled. We were masters of the wood, but there were neither roads nor paths through this thicket. It was intersected by so many ravines, and there were so many obstacles, that it was with infinite difficulty that it was traversed. Nearly all the material was left in it. The Cossacks became the more daring. For 2 days they never ceased renewing their attacks. But they had themselves been obliged to make a circuit. Their cannon was in a rear. They had no artillery. A few voltigeurs did justice on them. Ney was close upon Orza. The night was advanced. He marched in silence. He flattered himself that he had at last ridded himself of the enemy. On a sudden, he perceives the fires of bivouacs. He discovers the camp of a numerous army. He did not know whether he should rejoice or tremble, whether they were Russians or French, when a fire opened upon him removes his uncertainty. The reconnoitering parties are received with discharges of musketry. Explosions, cries, drums are mingled and confounded together. One would have thought that we were to give battle to all Russia. Furious at seeing danger return at the moment when he thought that he had escaped from it, the marshal makes an effort to open a passage. He rushes towards the fires, but the camp is deserted. It is a trick, a stratagem. Platov had, it appears, taken us for his own troops. He had thought to frighten us with shadows. The Duke disdained to follow a few Cossacks, who had been employed in this phantasmagoria. He continued his march, and 3 leagues further on reached the 4th Corps. That concludes the 11th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.